115 kilometers from Tangshan, a county official named Wang Chunqing told 470,000 people to sleep outside. Nobody ordered him to do that. In Tangshan itself, nobody said a word. It is July 28, 1976. The deadliest earthquake of the 20th century is 30 seconds away, and the difference between one death and 500,000 comes down to a single unauthorized decision made by a man that the Chinese government would refuse to honor for 30 years. Tangshan, 1976. A coal mining city of 1 million people in Hebei province, northeast China. The kind of city that built itself on extraction, underground, industrial, relentless. Its workers ran 3 shifts. Its buildings were unreinforced brick, stacked in rows, built to no seismic standard that would be recognized anywhere else in the industrialized world. In the summer of 1976, most of Tangshan's residents slept with their windows open against the July heat. They had no reason to think about earthquakes. The city sat inside the North China seismic zone, one of the most geologically active regions on the continent. But no one in an official capacity had told them that. What they had not been told, what the State Seismological Bureau in Beijing had not made public, was that in the months before July 28th, something was changing underground. Radon levels in regional groundwater had spiked. Wells were behaving strangely, water rising and falling without explanation. Animals across the region were acting in ways that rural residents found disturbing. Snakes emerging from the ground in unusual numbers, dogs refusing to enter buildings. And inside the State Seismological Bureau, a researcher named Wang Chunqing had been tracking anomalous precursor data across the Beijing-Tianjin-Tangshan triangle. In June 1976, he presented his findings at a national earthquake conference. No official warning was issued for Tangshan, but one person in that room was paying attention. We will come back to Wang Chunqing. What he decided to do with what he heard at that conference is the reason 470,000 people are still alive. But first, understand what the Bureau knew and what they chose to do with it. 14 months before Tangshan, Chinese seismologists had achieved something that no country in the world had managed before or since. They successfully predicted a major earthquake and ordered a mass evacuation. On February 4, 1975, the Haicheng earthquake, magnitude 7.3, struck a largely evacuated city. The prediction saved an estimated 150,000 lives. It was celebrated as a triumph of socialist science. What it actually did was create a dangerous overconfidence. The Bureau believed it had solved earthquake prediction. The instruments that had worked in Haicheng would work everywhere. The methodology was sound. The system was reliable. The anomalies in the Tangshan region were noted. They were discussed, and they were not acted upon with the same urgency as Haicheng, because the Bureau's models, built on the success they had just celebrated, did not match the pattern they were seeing. That gap between what the instruments were saying and what the models predicted cost the city everything. At 3:41 a.m. on July 28, 1976, Tangshan is asleep. 1 million people, brick walls, no warning, no sirens, no evacuation order. 11 kilometers beneath the surface, the Tangshan Fault, a northeast trending strike-slip system that had been accumulating stress for decades, releases. At 3:42 a.m. and 53 seconds, the rupture begins. It lasts 16 seconds. Peak ground acceleration in the city center reaches an estimated 6 to 0, 8 times the force of gravity. For context, unreinforced brick masonry, the material that makes up 95% of Tangshan's housing stock, begins to collapse structurally at 3G. The city does not shake. The city falls. 93% of residential buildings collapse in those 16 seconds. 78% of industrial structures. In the epicentral zone, 97% of all surface structures are gone before the ground stops moving. Approximately 656,000 people are buried in rubble before dawn. 7,218 entire families are wiped out, not a single member surviving. There are no neighbors to call for help because the neighbors are buried too. And then, at 6:45 p.m. that same day, 15 hours after the first strike, a magnitude 7.1 aftershock hits. The structures that partially survived the morning collapse. The rescue operation that had barely begun starts over. In Beijing, news of the earthquake reaches the central government within hours. Premier Hua Guofeng convenes an emergency response. 100,000 People's Liberation Army troops are mobilized. What is not mobilized? International rescue teams. Within days of the earthquake, offers of assistance arrive from dozens of countries: the Red Cross, the United States, Japan, the Soviet Union, Western European nations. All of them are refused. The Maoist principle of self-reliance made accepting foreign aid ideologically impossible. To admit that China needed outside help was to admit a weakness that the government could not acknowledge, especially in the final months of Mao Zedong's life. What the government sent to Tangshan first were not excavators, not rescue dogs, not trauma surgeons. They sent political propaganda teams, while thousands of survivors lay trapped in the rubble, alive, calling for help, dying of dehydration in the July heat. Party cadres organized political meetings among the survivors who had already been pulled out. The official death toll, 242,769, was not released to the Chinese public until 1979, 3 years after the disaster. Independent academic estimates, including those from the USGS, place the true figure between 500,000 and 655,000. The Chinese government has never confirmed a higher number. Now, Wang Chunqing. He is a seismological administrator for Qinglong County, a rural area 115 kilometers northeast of Tangshan's epicenter. He is not a senior figure. He has no authority beyond his county. In June 1976, he attends the National Earthquake Conference in Beijing. He hears Wang Chunqing's presentation on anomalous precursor data in the regional triangle. No official warning is issued. The Bureau has no consensus. The conference ends. Wang Chunqing goes home, without authorization, without a directive from the State Seismological Bureau, without any instruction from Beijing. He orders his county to prepare. He tells residents to avoid sleeping inside brick structures, to bring bedding outside, to stay alert. He organizes what amounts to an informal precautionary evacuation of 470,000 people, based on nothing more official than a conference presentation he had attended, and a decision that the risk was real enough to act on. At 3:42 a.m. on July 28th, the ground beneath Qinglong County shakes with an intensity of Roman 7 to Roman 8 on the modified Mercalli scale. Enough, by any engineering standard, to claim hundreds or thousands of lives in unreinforced brick buildings. Qinglong County records one death. One, a man who was too frightened by the shaking to leave his collapsing house. The distance between those two numbers, 1 and 242,000, or 1 and 655,000, depending on whose count you accept, is not the distance between two different earthquakes. It is the distance between one man who acted and a system that did not. Wang Chunqing was not celebrated. His unauthorized order could have been classified as a violation of party discipline. He received no commendation, no promotion, no public recognition. He was finally honored in 2006, 30 years after the earthquake, at a ceremony marking the anniversary. He was, by then, an old man. The city of Tangshan was rebuilt over 10 years. The new Tangshan was constructed to a different standard, reinforced concrete, seismic design requirements, improved urban planning. It became, somewhat improbably, a model of post-disaster reconstruction. In 1978, China issued new National Seismic Design Standards, TJ 11-78, mandating earthquake-resistant construction in all seismically active regions. These were the first enforceable building codes of their kind in China's history. They were revised and strengthened in 1989, 2001, and 2010, each revision bringing Chinese construction closer to international seismic safety standards. The China Earthquake Administration, restructured from the State Seismological Bureau, received dramatically increased funding for monitoring networks. What they did not change, at least not immediately, was the political structure that had refused foreign aid while survivors waited in rubble, or the information suppression that kept the true death toll classified for 3 years. That change came from somewhere else. Mao Zedong died 43 days after the earthquake. In Chinese cosmology, a catastrophic earthquake followed weeks later by the death of a leader carries a specific meaning. The mandate of heaven has shifted. The Gang of Four was arrested in October 1976. The era that had made Tangshan's cover-up possible ended, not because of the earthquake, but the earthquake was its signal. The Tangshan Earthquake Memorial was completed in 1995. It lists 242,769 names. How many names are missing from that wall? That is a question the Chinese government has never answered. Wang Chunqing, the man who saved 470,000 people without being asked to, died knowing that the official record barely mentioned him. The records of what the Seismological Bureau knew, and when, remain partially classified. The gap between those two facts is where this story lies. If you want to understand how political ideology turns a natural disaster into a human catastrophe, the story of what happened 6 months earlier and 4,500 kilometers west is waiting for you. The Soviet Union's response to its own worst nuclear disaster followed a pattern that Tangshan would have recognized. That episode is next.